Okay, and so in this lecture, I'm going to look at the transaction identifier in the MBAP header. I left this one for last because it's a little more difficult to understand. So by definition, it says this identifier field is used for transaction pairing, right? When multiple messages are sent along the same TCP connection by a client without waiting for a prior response. So let me go to the other slide. Now remember, one of the points about Modbus TCP IP that I mentioned earlier in this course is that a Modbus client can send multiple Modbus requests to a server or servers without waiting for a response for each one. It doesn't necessarily have to send and then wait for a response before doing a next request, right? This poses a little bit of a problem that is solved by the transaction identifier. So let me show you what I mean with an example. So let's say that this Modbus client sends a request, which is a read coil status, and the coil is 32. And immediately after, it sends a read coil 89 status. And immediately after that, it says read coil 206 status, right? And it sends all to this Modbus server. But for some reason, what happens due to network traffic, the responses to these various queries arrive not in the same order in which they are sent. All right. So what happens is that what arrives first back to the Modbus client is the response for the third request sent or query sent. Then what happens after that? The result for coil 89, number 2, is sent. And then what comes last is the result really for the very first coil status request. All right. Now this can actually happen due to network conditions. Probably won't happen often, but it's due to network conditions. So what happens is that the transaction identifier is actually a unique number that is appended onto the, actually part of the MBAP header that acts like an ID for the transaction, for the query response cycle. So let me show you what I mean. Let's say that when this message was sent out, the transaction identifier was 10, and for this one 11, and for this one 12. What would happen when the result comes back in? The transaction identifiers would come in the same way. However, the system or the client will be able to match these transaction identifiers together, and it would know that, for instance, the third request sent, right? The first response received is really for the third one, and the second is for the second, and the third response that was obtained is really for the first message or query that was sent. All right, so you can see that what the transaction identifier does is really allows for pairing of transactions. Okay, 10 to 10, 11 to 11, 12 to 12. All right, and that is what the transaction identifier does. It solves that problem where responses coming back in are not necessarily in the same order in which the queries went out. Okay.